Hi everyone, it's Jim, Song Tripping. Welcome back. If you're new here, welcome. I am continuing on my quest through different versions of Genesis albums, and I was the other day browsing my local record shop, and I've been trying to keep an eye out for the definitive edition CD remasters from the 90s. I have a few of those in my collection, but there's a few more I want to add. So I did come across, and then there were three. 1978 album by Genesis. I got this for $5.99. I thought that was a relatively fair price. CD prices are inching up lately, but that's a decent price for something that I wanted. This happens to be an Argentinian pressing of this album. Usually the definitive edition ones, they have a white label with the black lettering on top. This one's silver, but it all checks out. It's the real deal. This is the definitive edition remaster. So I was excited. So then that gave me a chance to compare this copy with my other digital copy, which is the 2007 remix remasters. That includes DVD extras. And this happens to be a club edition. But yeah, so I was excited. Like now I finally get a chance to do a deep dive into, and then there were three. And then I was only going to do a digital-only shootout, but then once I listened to these two CD versions and made up my mind which I preferred and why, I thought, what the heck, let's pit my winner up against my original vinyl copy. This is on the Atlantic label. And I can't remember when I got this. It was a long time ago. But gatefold cover. Cover designed by Hypnosis. You see the spine's kind of worn, but it's a nice vintage old copy of, and then there were three. So I've listened to this album a lot. I did my listening test in headphones, my Sony headphones, and did a lot of comparing and contrasting. Let me talk a little bit first about the album and where this is positioned in Genesis's career. I've always seen this as a transitional album. So, and then there were three as a reference to there's only three members of the band left. So Steve Hackett has departed the band. The last album he did with Genesis was Wind and Wuthering. And he was on Trick of the Tail, and he's on the earlier stuff too. So Peter Gabriel's long gone. He left after Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, but that new version of Genesis, including Steve Hackett, they were around for Trick of the Tail and Wind and Wuthering, which are two of my favorite Genesis albums. I miss Steve Hackett on this album, but they're down to three. It's transitional because you can see them starting to move. It's still a prog rock album, I would argue, but they're starting to move in a direction that you can hear like a more prog pop sound emerging. Now they will really get into this, I think, in a much more successful fashion when they get to Duke, which is the album following this one, and then Abacab after that. But for now, they're kind of finding their way, and I think you can sort of hear that in the music a little bit. It starts off pretty strong. If you think about side one, Down and Out, Undertow, Ballad of Big, Snowbound, and Burning Rope. I think Down and Out is a nice opening track. The drumming is incredible. Phil is really like, slamming. Undertow is one of my favorite songs on the album, a Tony Banks song. Ballad of Big, maybe a little bit of a setback. It has some moments though. There are moments in every song on the album, but do they successfully carry through these moments? Not all the time. I thought Snowbound was a highlight too. This is a Mike Rutherford track, has that very lush ascendant chorus and Phil singing really strong. It's kind of an epic, kind of lush, sad prog ballad, if you will. I even like Burning Rope. I think that's a pretty strong song to finish outside one. But then you get to side two, and I think things start to sag. I mean, Deep in the Motherlode, I think, is a pretty cool song. But Many Too Many Scenes from a Night's Dream, Say It's All Right, Joe, and The Lady Lies, I feel like now we're starting to sag a little bit, where the songs aren't as consistently successful. And there's not a whole lot of cohesion between tracks in terms of what the songs are about. They're like kind of ideas they're playing with. I don't see a lot of continuity, and yet musically there's maybe too much cohesion. I really miss Steve Hackett's contributions. He added a lot of spice and variety and some songwriting too. He's missed. And the sound is just kind of like filled with a lot of Tony Banks keyboard and Mike Rutherford guitars and bass, and Phil's like heavy, busy drumming. It's good, but it doesn't hold a candle to Wind and Wuthering or Trick of the Tail for my money. We've kind of dipped. And then you finish the album with what was a radio hit, Follow You, Follow Me. I don't know if that was their most successful single up to this point in their career. And that's certainly a catchy song, like the kind of delay effect on the guitar or whatever he's doing on that kind of chunky pattern is very catchy, and it's a good groove, kind of a warm groove. I think there's some organ in there, like kind of a pad that's kind of holding things together. But I'm not a fan of the chorus of that song. Like it's just too repetitive for me. Na 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 na, and it just does like that through the whole chorus. And not only that, Phil's singing that, but then this kind of almost offensive Tony Banks synth is kind of doubling that melody. And I like Tony's solo, but like the kind of doubling of what Phil's singing just doesn't work so well for me. So although the song's catchy, I also have often found it to be a little bit on grating, a little bit on the annoying side. Don't get me wrong, I like the sentiment of the song. It's kind of a nice lovey, sentimental kind of thing. But it's not again, it's not as good as Your Own Special Way or Afterglow from Wind and Wuthering. So I feel like we've come down a notch from what came before. But it's an interesting way to finish the album. And that's hinting at the pop direction you're getting into. Okay, let's get down to the business of comparing the editions. So first, I listened to the new one, new for me, the newly purchased Definitive Edition Remaster. And it's just, I'm not going to share a listening test here. I didn't record anything. I'm just going to describe what I heard. I thought this had a very full sound. There's plenty of bass. I've heard, I do not have the original CD release of this album. I would like to find one because I would like to compare it. And if you watch my Abacab Shootout, I really sort of preferred that version overall, like the early one. I think it was a West German Target. But this, I don't have that, so I can't compare. But I've heard other people say that the sound's a little thin and it's a little bit lacking in bass and so forth. Well, that's not the case with the Definitive Edition Remaster. I think there's plenty of bass. The drums are nice and punchy. Those fills really come through. But there is a kind of a murky, muddy middle, like the mid-ranges here are just sort of thick. And I think this maybe isn't the fault of the Definitive Edition Remaster. I think it's a fault of the source recording. Like the way this was mixed, it has a muddy middle. I don't know how else to put it. I was playing this on my Marantz system with my default volume. My default volume usually listening is -40. 0 is like the highest possible volume, so you go kind of backwards. So -40 is the default. I was trying to listen to it at -38, but then I had to dial back to -40 in my headphones just to that was a more comfortable listen for me. Let's now turn to the remix remaster from 2007. Here, it's a mixed bag. So if there is a Genesis album that I think you could argue deserves a remix, this would be one of them. And they made some interesting mixing choices. There was one song, it might have been Burning Rope, I can't remember exactly, but I was noticing a lot more acoustic piano, like, and some stuff was cutting through that wasn't cutting through before. And sometimes you would hear a little accentuated guitar. There was things that were popping out. And I thought that was kind of a nice take, and potentially an improvement over the original mix. The problem is, and it's the problem with all of these 2007 remix remasters, is way too loud, way too harsh, really, really harsh. The quiet passages are sort of tolerable and interesting, but then when like dynamics like amp up, it just becomes assault and battery on your ears. And it was actually making my teeth hurt. So I had to dial back the volume from -40, which is what I had landed on for the definitive edition, and I had to dial it back to -48. I mean, that's pretty low for, much lower than my normal listening volume, and that's just how loud and harsh these remasters are. And it was a shame because I think the mix is kind of okay. It's just a shame they had to, make them so loud. So I have very mixed feelings about all these versions. But if I had to pick, and that's maybe why you're watching this video, this is just subjective, your mileage may vary. I'm going to go with the definitive edition remaster just because it's overall more listenable. It's more well-rounded. It's not as like offensive in these loud passages, and yet there's plenty of punch. There's good, I think good bottom end. The drawback to the definitive edition for me was like the thickness of sort of muddiness of the mix. Like they didn't really fix that, and it's just kind of, there's a certain lack of breathing room. It's a little bit lifeless, not as involving maybe as I would want it to be. And I think this 2007 tried to rectify that. And in moments, it is more lively. There is more sort of breath to it, but ultimately, the harshness of too much of the album is too harsh, and I can't give it the nod. Okay, so now let me turn to the vinyl. I listened to that this morning in the headphones, also at -40. Now my phono preamp on that Marantz tends to be juicier. It's like usually I have to dial up the volume a little bit more on the CD than I do for vinyl. But this sounded fine at -40. I didn't really have to change that. This pressing, there's nothing fancy about this pressing. I haven't done a lot of research, but it's pretty much, it's probably a repress of the original and Atlantic label. It's very quiet, the vinyl. It's I'd say it's VG plus quality, if not a little higher. And I didn't clean it thoroughly. I gave it like sort of a spot clean and did the anti-static brush. But no complaints about like the vinyl, like that wasn't getting in the way, like the vinyl quality. The sonics I thought were very well balanced, but that murky mix was evident on this version too. That muddy middle, it's real thick. It's hard to get space around the instruments, and I just don't think you can get a perfect version of this album due to the compromised source recording. It is what it is. I will say, it's funny how you get these impressions, but Follow You, Follow Me sounded the best on vinyl. Of the three versions, I found that the most listenable, the warmest, like the groove felt really good. It was a pleasant listen. And that synth line, it was less offensive on the vinyl. It felt like it was a bit more in the background and Phil's vocal was more in front. So nothing really offensive about the presentation at all. And there was a little bit more of a mystique, I'd say, to the vinyl presentation than either of the digital ones. And I guess that leads me to say that if you pressed me, I'm going to go with the vinyl as my preferred listening format for this album overall. It has a balanced presentation. It's got some warm vibes to it. It's at times it sounds a little thin, but then at other times it's got some bass oomph to it. Probably the definitive edition CD has a little bit more bass oomph going for it. So it's close. It's close between the definitive edition CD and the vinyl. But the overall aesthetic appeal, you know, you get the nice gatefold, Hypnosis artwork, and it's just the overall like package. I think the vinyl is a better listening experience. But that being said, it's still a little bit of a frustrating album to listen to. And the definitive, I'm sorry, the 2007 remix is kind of a missed opportunity, because I think they were on the right track with the remix, but then they kind of ruined it with the loudness, and that's a shame. I'm really at the point now with these remixes, the ones that have the DVD extras, and they have 5.1 mixes too, which I don't have a 5.1 system, so I can't comment on that. But I'm going to relegate these to my DVD shelf at this point, because I don't want to accidentally like pull this off the shelf and listen to it and be offended by the sound. I'm going to curate these copies to just be like my go-to Genesis digital. So I think these DVD ones, they just belong on the video shelf. And that's really the only reason I'm going to keep them, is if I ever want to watch the DVD extras or something like that. And the big hole in this picture I cannot comment on is the original, and then there were 3 on CD, which I'm sure came out in the 80s. I don't have a copy of that. I'll keep an eye out for it, and if I ever do find one, I'll revisit this topic and I'll pit it against the others. We'll do like a shootout part 2. So let me know what your go-to versions of this album are. What are your thoughts on the original mix and on the remix? What are your thoughts just in terms of your own like taste and your own assessment of the overall quality of the music? I feel like it's a transitional record. It has some really nice moments. It feels like some of the songs almost could have belonged on Wind and Wuthering. They might have even been leftovers. I'm not sure about the recording history. And yet, like, maybe they didn't make the cut. Like, it has that kind of leftover feel a little bit, but also like we're trying new things, but we haven't quite found our way now that we're a trio. That being said, there's a lot of nice playing on it. There's some really nice moments. And it was fun to listen to this album so much, like back to back to back, because I feel like I know it a lot better. Like a lot of those songs on side 2, they just kind of like mesh together for me. And I'm now beginning to distinguish between them a little bit better, and you kind of wait for your favorite parts of the song. But that being said, it's not I don't think it's one of their better albums. I put it kind of on the lower rungs. But let me know what your assessment is of this album. I'd love to know. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this shootout, and I hope you catch the channel again real soon. Bye-bye.